Welcome to Season 5 of SheVentures. I am your host, Doria Lavanino. SheVentures is a podcast about women and their work and life pivots. I believe in the power of storytelling. I also believe that if you change one woman's life, you start to change a family or a community. Our mission is to elevate the diverse stories of everyday women in their worth. One promise, no mansplaining ever. Sit back, listen, and hit subscribe. We'd love to hear from you. You can find us at SheVenturesPodcast.com. Her career started in marketing for Edelman, where she rose to an executive role, half a decade in PR leadership. 9 years ago, she founded her agency, 2010, providing career development workshops and group coaching to underrepresented women across the country. She is also the author of Prep, Push, Pivot, Essential Career Strategies for Underrepresented Women, published by Wiley, named one of the most recommended books by Refinery29, Management Today, and Cosmo. Octavia Goredema, welcome to SheVentures.
Oh, thank you so much for the warm welcome. So happy to be here.
When I was researching your background, I found tons about you professionally. And I was wondering if you could tell listeners a little bit about Octavia growing up.
Octavia growing up was endlessly curious about so many things. And that's still the case today. I was such an avid reader, and I still devour books, but the degree to which I devoured books as a kid was just off the charts. Just loved books, loved writing, loved anything creative, just really curious about things. And yes, that was me as a child. And yes, I didn't, fully appreciate that then, but so many of those things are so prevalent in the work that I do now.
Absolutely. I can see that. Was there one person or event that helped define you?
Oh, goodness.
I promise that'll be my hardest question. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really hard question to answer, Doria, because there are continually moments that inspire me. Even this week, I was in a coaching session this week, which I was leading, but the conversation that I was having with my coachee just invigorated and inspired me and made me think about things a little differently in terms of when I'm looking at 2023. So it's hard to say if there was one moment, to be honest.
Or one person.
Yes.
Fair enough. Now, I'm going to ask you this because I'm American and we're hopelessly fascinated by British people and the royal order. And I know that you were appointed a member of the order by the British Empire, by the late Queen. My partner was born in the UK, although he's of Indian origin. And so he told me we're both journalists. I told him I was interviewing you. He said, no, that's a really big deal. And he said, she must have done something really noteworthy. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, I am now a dual US-UK citizen, but you're right. I was born and raised in England and moved from England to the United States in 2005. And yes, I was appointed an member of the Order of the British Empire in the year 2012 by Queen Elizabeth. And it was in recognition of work that I was doing to support Black women in business. I started an organization called 2010 Club, and it provided peer-to-peer support. And when I look back on it now, it really was peer-to-peer coaching and mentoring for Black women in business, but also crucially, we did work with school children. It was very important to me to provide access to role models, access to individuals who might be able to not just talk about what they've done, but answer questions about how they got there, or to share perspectives on what their childhood had been like and their journey had been like, and the pieces that we often don't see. That work began from a curiosity and very organic place of me being curious about the journeys of others and wanting to support others, and then thinking about how we, as women who are perhaps perceived to be in a position to provide perspective, could also help that next generation. When that work began, I didn't really know how it would culminate. I certainly did not know that I would end up receiving an honor for my work, which was an icing on the cake, but the cake itself was really the women I was able to meet and learn from and connect with, and the work that we were able to do was just fantastic.
That's outstanding. And it kind of leads me to my final question about England, which is, as a woman of color, did you feel racism in the UK?
Oh, of course. Institutional racism is pervasive, and sometimes it's impossible to ignore when you're called a racial slur or are the subject of microaggressions, whether that's at school or university or in the workplace. But I think it took me a long time to realize the longer term implications of that, not just from a societal perspective, but just from your own progression. It became the norm as I was navigating my career that I might be the only Black woman, not just on a team, but, in a meeting, sometimes in the building. And that became the norm for me. It still is the norm for me in many instances and for so many of us. And so, yes, of course, there have been so many moments that I've had to navigate, or things that I've experienced or supported others through in terms of their own experiences. And I think that's pervasive wherever you are.
I take your word for it that it certainly is also an issue in the United States as well. You attended college in England, and then it seems as though your career started when you moved to the United States and you moved to LA. And that is a pivot, right?
Yes. Well, my career actually started before I moved to LA. I have a degree in politics and history, and I secured my first job in London actually even before my graduation ceremony. I saw an entry-level position in public relations advertised in a national newspaper, and entry-level positions at that time weren't really advertised in national newspapers because those ads cost money, and entry-level positions, it's the lowest scale. But I saw an opportunity and I applied for it. And actually, I had my heart set on remaining in the Midlands in England, and this was an opportunity in London, but I applied and I interviewed and I was offered the role. And I was really conflicted for a long time about, what should I do? Should I move to London? Thank goodness I said yes. And so I did. I rented a removal truck and moved all of my things, started my job, and then I actually had to take time off for my graduation ceremony. And I worked in London for 5 years before I moved to Los Angeles. So I'd already started my career and I'd achieved certain milestones. And when I moved to Los Angeles, I transferred with my company in a management position.
So you were at Edelman in London and transferred?
Yes, they had actually acquired a PR agency that I worked at while I was there. It became part of Edelman, and then I moved to Los Angeles.
What attracted you to move to Los Angeles in the United States?
Oh, love. I moved here to be with my husband.
Oh,
we were not married at the time, but he was the reason, and he was the sole reason that I moved. But professionally, it was an opportunity to do something that I had never done before. I'd never worked overseas. I was excited about that component, but yes, I took a real leap of faith to do that. And what I realize now with the benefit of hindsight is it was the best professional decision I could ever have made, but it was a very personal decision that I made.
Got it. So it was a personal decision, but it ended up turning out very well for you, is what you're saying.
Yes, absolutely.
And in looking at your career, you have certainly rose through hard work up the proverbial career ladder. What would you say are qualities that you have innately Or how have others helped you develop to propel you forward?
Innately, I'm very, very driven, but I'm also incredibly motivated by providing opportunities for others to rise and to thrive. I'm really invested when I lead teams or projects or programs. I'm really invested in opening doors of opportunity where possible to others. I have been told that I'm a really great communicator. I don't really think about that. But of course, the thread of all the work that I've done from my corporate professional career through my work as a coach and my work as an author and work that I've done to host programs, yes, communication is a common thread that connects a lot of things.
I was going to say you're being so modest too, because I also know that you hosted a show, the Harvard Business Review, for 1 year during the pandemic, which is really amazing. How did you find that?
Oh, the opportunity found me.
Very nice when that happened.
I didn't know about that opportunity at all. I was asked by the team at Harvard Business Review if I would consider the opportunity. Just like with my move to Los Angeles, when the opportunity came, I said yes. And it was a fantastic experience. It was season 2 of HBR Now, which was a weekly live show about leadership, which I co-hosted with Josh Markt and R.D. Ignatius at Harvard Business Publishing. And it was such a joy to do. And I now host content for Pinterest on their TV platform. And I never have always known where what the next step is for me, because I'm often been pleasantly surprised by opportunities that have come my way.
Can you describe your pivot from, I guess, corporate America, and you also obviously have a writing interest, to pivoting to start your own agency 9 years ago?
It was a gradual culmination that had some catalyst moments along the way. I've always been fascinated about what comes before success and what we as individuals navigate as we are building our careers and what it takes to do that. That ultimately culminated in me training to become a career coach and coaching others. But it also had another track where I loved talking to people and interviewing people about those journeys and about obstacles they've overcome and insights that they have and advice that they have for others. And I love to write. I would interview people for my own blog. I would interview people for the Guardian newspaper in the UK. I'd interview people for Black Enterprise here in the United States. And I always wanted to be an author. And actually, Doria, the biggest pivot I think I made was making that happen. All of those things that I was doing, coupled with my own fascination about professional development and career development, and then discovering what coaching can do and how it can just be so transformative, and training to become a coach. And the first thing I had to do in my training was to start coaching others, like literally right from the beginning. And I'm so glad that it was very action oriented in that way versus just theoretical, because I had to jump right in and start. And once I did that, I realized there was so much to it that just fulfilled me. And then running along the same time, I received an email out of the blue asking if I could be a champion for an exhibition and also be featured in an exhibition called Women Who Dared that was taking place at the University of Oxford to mark the centenary of women achieving the right to vote. And they wanted to feature me alongside a number of other women on a special wall in the exhibition. And I flew to Oxford for the opening, and it was housed in this beautiful historic library at the University of Oxford, which is like centuries old. In that moment, it just cemented to me. And also I spoke at an event that week, and it just cemented for me that I really needed to use my voice, and I needed to write the book that I ended up writing. But then those things coincided. And so I made the pivot to leave corporate America and to devote time to write my book and to continue coaching and to see where that took me.
So it was not a gradual process. You stopped, because I hear different variations of this pivot. I hear of people who do work and then take on clients a little bit at a time until they get their business to where they need it to be. And then others who just stop what they're doing and they really know that they have to focus on this next chapter of their professional life. So it sounds like it was the latter for you.
Yes, it ended up being the latter, but there was the former too, in terms of there were just seeds that were being planted, but I didn't really know how they were going to culminate. But yes, I do remember probably that trip to Oxford being a point where I returned when I was like, I really want to see what it would be like to really just channel my energy into writing a book and to see where that takes me. And so that's what I did.
And you mentioned that the pivot to being an author was probably even more of a significant one. Do you want to share why that was?
Because I always dreamed of doing this as a child, and I gave up on that dream very early. But I also realized for the book that I wrote, which is a career coaching guide for underrepresented women in the workplace, it's called Prep, Push, Pivot, and it was published by Wiley in 2022. I could not have written that book without having given up on dreams early on in my career, without having built a career that started in London and then moving to the United States, without having become a manager and a director, and without having led teams and hired people and all of the things that I did professionally, all of that, plus then as a coach and how I've supported others, all of those things contributed to the body of work and the perspectives and insights that I ultimately had to share. So end result, I now realize it's never too late. It's never too late. But when I embarked on this journey to become an author, I didn't know that I would end up at the point that I'm at now. I didn't know that I would end up with a book that's available in bookstores. I did not know that, but I wanted to see what would happen if I didn't give up.
And clearly you are very tenacious, which I admire greatly, because it's so true that oftentimes either society gives us feedback that makes us kind of shrink a little bit from what we want to go after. And for whatever reason, you've been able to keep going. And that is
not always. Doria.
So tell me
always.
A time,
oh, no, of course not.
Tell me a time when you couldn't.
Oh, goodness. There's so many times, there's times when there's jobs that you've wanted and you know that you would have excelled at and you don't get the opportunity. There's times where this wasn't the first book idea that I had. There were times when things don't work out, or either you stop yourself or gatekeepers or circumstances stop you. There are times when people will tell you, yeah, I don't know if you can do that. I don't know if that's going to be possible for you. I don't know how you will make that work. There's so many times where you will hear no. I just had the opportunity. I'm so late to the game. I watched Hamilton for the first time with my daughters this month. But then I was just so consumed with everything that Lin-Manuel Miranda did to bring that to life. And he was told, as he was working on that project by his mentor, I don't think that's going to work so well. Everybody, even when you look at people who are at the pinnacle of what they do, like Lin-Manuel, or just even in your own sphere, in terms of whatever your next step is, there's going to be times where something might just seem like it's out of reach, or even when you believe in it, it doesn't seem like things are aligning. My career has had as many dips as there have been highs, and that's a thing. And that's why I love coaching, because people only see the end result. They see your LinkedIn profile, or they see your job title, or they see a bio, or they read something maybe that you have shared, or whatever it is that you do, something that you've created or something that you've led, but they don't know what it has taken, and perhaps how many no's there have been, or how many setbacks there have been. Nobody else often knows that.
I really love that you're saying that, because it mirrors what I've heard often, which is when women have achieved a certain amount, really, if you want to emulate their success in your own way, because you're your own person, look at what they were doing 10, 15, 20 years ago, because that is also really informative of who they became. It wasn't like it just happened.
And also, success is, how do you define that? It becomes how every individual defines that. And trust me, I have supported as a coach so many people who are incredibly successful when you look at terms of their accomplishments, but they are navigating so many things that they actually don't even necessarily perceive that as success yet, because there's things that they still haven't done yet, or the things that aren't fully aligned the way that they want them to be. So yes, it's a journey.
It's definitely a journey. Back to your company. I know that you've worked with some very, very big organizations, Google, American Airlines, Tinder, General Motors, Nike, and Dow Jones. I was wondering, as a small business owner myself, what kind of offerings would you have for solopreneurs or smaller businesses?
I predominantly work with organizations who are looking for a coach to support their employees or to deliver group coaching or professional development support. But I do from time to time work with individual clients. That tends to happen when someone has read my book or connected with something that I have, because I write for other spaces too, and something that I've maybe written or perhaps listened to an interview and then reached out with a very direct ask. And if it aligns with something that I think I might be able to support them with, then I think it's very important for me to hold some time for those opportunities, because not everyone works at a company or organization that can provide access to coaching and professional development. And then just more broadly, you mentioned about other solopreneurs. I am endlessly curious about what other people do and their work. And so I just love connecting. I'm a fellow of an organization called the Royal Society of Arts, Manufactures and Commerce, which is in essence a think tank of global social innovators. It started in London 280 plus years ago, but now represents 30,000 fellows around the world who do an array of different things. And I lead the Gender Equity Network for the RSA here in the United States. And I served on the steering committee for their mentoring program. And I'm endlessly curious about what other people do and how I can make introductions. And that I do just by default, whether I'm coaching someone or not, in terms of if I can help or open a door, or it's often just connecting people. I love to do that.
So you're a very apt networker, I guess, in your curiosity. I was wondering, because of an interview I had yesterday, and it was about the topic of race and corporations. It was a short film that I watched, really brought to the fore this idea of a lot of corporations kind of putting up Black Lives Matter on their Instagram, for example, or doing corporate initiatives, throwing money at something, but not really getting behind like the root cause or making sure that metrics are being looked at and that change is actually happening. I guess my question in all of this is, in your experience, what percentage of companies would you say are very metrics focused and really trying to work on this issue of race and women of color in particular? And what percentage are kind of like calling it in?
I haven't done any studies that could give a percentage, but I do firmly believe there's still so much work to be done. That's because the issues that companies are endeavoring, even with best intentions, to address are not easy fixes. These are not easy fixes. So there has to be an investment that is made over a substantive amount of period, not just in terms of endeavoring to hire diverse talent, but to retain that talent, to support that talent, and to advance that talent, because women of color, the most underrepresented group in the corporate pipeline. And big reason why I wrote my book is because when you look at the stats in terms of what we earn, how the pay gap impacts us, when you have the intersectionality of gender and race, is just abhorrent. We lose, on average, $1 million over the course of our lifetime, $1 million because of the pay gap and how that culminates over the course of your career. But then when you also just look at leadership levels, when you look at C-suites, when you look at boards, when you look at vice presidents and you look at the representation, the lack of representation. And then, you have people who get to a certain point and they're leaving corporate America. And these things hurt my heart. It's going to take more than just a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. It has to be a long-term double down invested commitment to change a trajectory that we are currently on, because the way things were before the pandemic, it was going to take over a century to close the pay gap, Doria. There's so many things. And I have, just in the past few years, seen so many steps that are being made in terms of teams that are being built for diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, culture. I think we have to look and see 5-10 years from now what progress has been made. I think it's too early to even begin to say with impact. But the pandemic, my goodness, the pandemic, it's been so hard for all of us, but I hope we've not gone backwards. I hope we can continue to push forwards.
I think with an awareness, I think it starts there. Obviously, action has to then follow. But I think that by awareness with things like your book, that is one way in which it can happen. Do you want to highlight, what would you say are the 3 key issues that, I was going to ask about women generally, but really women of color, if it is a different set of issues that they face in the workplace?
Yeah, we need sponsors in order to advance more often than not. Because we are the most underrepresented group in the corporate pipeline, for us to be able to move forward, we need senior leaders to invest in us, not just in hiring us. That's one part, but then to invest in us. There's a stat that I share in my book about how the disparity between the access to senior leadership for women of color compared to white males in terms of visibility and being in the room, having the connections.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to ask you though, you would agree it's not a pipeline problem, right? It's a visibility problem.
No. Yeah, it's visibility, but then also having sponsors who are invested in your career development for you to move up, for you to have an individual who can guide you in terms of not just in terms of getting your job done and what it takes to be visible, but in terms of recommending you for opportunities, for giving you stretch assignments, for being a sounding board. I've had people like that in my career. I still have people like that who open doors for me. But when you no longer have that individual, if that individual moves on, or if that relationship shifts, it's very hard for us to do those things by ourselves. We need sponsors. That's what we need. And so I see that time and time again for the people that I know who have been able to get promoted, to work up the ranks, to become very senior leaders. There was another more senior individual who helped make that happen. Now, of course, your own ability is paramount, and your drive and your ambition and your goals, but it's very hard for us to do those things on our own and still get the opportunity to continue to advance. Often there's a ceiling.
Right. If someone isn't, everyone has to have a mentor to be shown the way. It also helps with confidence, I think, as well.
It does, but a sponsor is the next level to a mentor. A mentor will tell you, Doria, this is what I did to get promoted. A sponsor will say, Doria, this is what I'm going to do to help you get promoted.
And that is the active role that women or men that are allies should be playing.
Yes.
That's so helpful, actually, to hear the concreteness of how to do it, because it sounds simple, but I think sometimes, and I'm not saying this is an excuse, I think people don't know what to do. And so it's important that people find out what they can do.
Yes, be there to be a sounding board. Share what you have earned at different stages in your career. That is a game changer. It can be, sometimes you can be working in a culture that is very transparent about salaries and compensations, but oftentimes we're not. Even with new legislation that is coming into play in different parts of the United States, some of the salary brackets that are being shared as a result are huge. And so it's always helpful to hear from others in terms of what they've earned at different stages in their career, or what their perceptions could be for what you should be earning, because that can make such a difference.
I think women tend to undervalue themselves almost always.
And also, even when we don't undervalue ourselves and even when we do ask, we don't always get what we ask for. That's another thing that I address in my book is how to bounce back when you hear no.
Is it negotiating?
Oh, negotiating is important and it's a skill that we have to leverage, but not all negotiations are successful, Doria. But that doesn't mean that you stop. It just means you keep arming yourself with information until you find opportunities that align. And knowing your worth is so important, especially when your worth is not being reflected back at you.
I had to think about that for a second, but I completely agree with you. In your book, can you highlight 3 areas that you believe women of color, let me ask it this way. Are there 3 areas that women of color typically come to you for coaching in?
Yes. My book is called Prep, Push, Pivot, and I wrote it as a career guide that underrepresented women could use at any point in their career, regardless of level of seniority, whether you are in a role and looking to get promoted or whether you're in between roles and looking for that next opportunity, or maybe you're considering taking a career break or coming back from a career break, to help you plan your next step, know your worth, reach for what you want in your career, ask for what you want, and overcome obstacles along the way. I see a lot of scenarios, but the common threads that I see in terms of in my coaching are people who want to be promoted, who are ticking all the boxes but haven't been. What can they do next? How do they navigate that? I often work with people who are having challenges with coworkers in terms of how do they navigate that, especially if that coworker is someone that they report into, in terms of how can they fix a relationship, demonstrate their worth, navigate that. I also coach people who have been promoted and have landed that incredible role either in their organization or in a new organization, but then aren't being respected by their direct reports. And what do they do to navigate that?
So your book will help them along those common threads.
It definitely helps in terms of answering questions that I hear as a coach that I've supported others on and giving action-oriented recommendations on how you can navigate your career. But I have to also say, we need multiple levels of support in terms of managing our career. Everyone should have access, if possible, to a career coach. Everyone, if possible, should have not just one mentor, but several. Everyone needs a sponsor within their organization. And the thing is, Doria, we don't always have all access to all of those things. We even with the best intentions. And so I wanted to write a book for someone who perhaps doesn't have access to a career coach or might not have the budget for a career coach. Because often if you don't have access to it through your company and you're perhaps looking for it yourself, coaching is quite expensive. It's not easy. I wanted to create something that you could use if you didn't have access to that. But yes, where possible, perhaps with peers, maybe look at where you went to school. There are alumni that you might be able to be introduced to. Are there people in the industry that are maybe a step ahead from you that you could have a conversation with, even if it's not a formalized mentoring relationship? Try and find sounding boards and people that you can connect with in addition, because we also face very unique challenges. And as a coach, when I'm working one-on-one, I'm able to work with someone for 6 months, 12 months and really build and grow and troubleshoot. Not everyone has access to that. And so, yes, my book is definitely a starting point in terms of questions and answers and strategies and advice and toolkits. But definitely, yes, leverage your network as much as you possibly can.
That is a really wonderful note to end this conversation on. You have been so incredibly insightful in what you've said here today. Can you tell our listeners where they can find more about you and the work that you're doing and your book, of course?
If you go to octaviagoredema.com, my website, and you can click on a link at the top of the page and read the first chapter of my book right now, if you would like to. It's also available to buy wherever you love to buy books, including independent and Black-owned bookstores as well. And if you use LinkedIn and listen to this episode, please do reach out and connect with me. I'm always happy to connect and would love to connect with you.
Thank you so much for being on SheVentures, Octavia.
Oh, thank you so much, Doria. It was wonderful to talk to you.
You've been listening to SheVentures. Like what you heard? You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe and sign up for our newsletter so you never miss a show.